CJSW 90.9 FM is proud to present our 2025 federal election coverage. CJSW radio broadcasts out of the University of Calgary campus located in Calgary, Alberta, and we would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta. The City of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Districts 5 and 6.
My name is Kyle McCreamy, and in this episode, we'll be highlighting how political parties in Canada will manage the economy if elected into power. These policies and commitments have been taken from the political platforms released by each of the parties with official party status in the House of Commons, namely the Liberal Party, Conservative Party, New Democratic Party, referred to as the NDP, and the Bloc Québécois, referred to as the Bloc. We'll move through major talking points within the topic and how each party addresses points within those. If a specific point doesn't appear alongside the other parties mentioned, it's because we weren't able to find anything within their platforms to add. We encourage people to take the time to read through those platforms, but you can keep listening to hear about some of the major points about how parties will approach economic matters if elected. Topic 1. U.S. Trade Tariffs. According to their platform, the Liberal Party plans on matching 25% tariffs on all vehicles imported from the U.S. that are not compliant with CUSMA. They plan on leveraging government funding to prioritize and procure Canadian-built vehicles, catalyzing domestic investment to grow the Canadian auto industry. According to the Conservatives, in response to the U.S. trade tariffs on Canada, they promise to continue Canadian counter-tariffs until the U.S. removes all of its tariffs. A Conservative government would direct most of the revenue collected from counter-tariffs toward tax relief, with a sum set aside for targeted relief for workers. They plan on cutting the federal sales tax on Canadian-made vehicles and launching a Keep Canadians Working fund until U.S. tariffs are lifted to protect the jobs of auto workers directly targeted by Trump's trade war. The Bloc parties say that they would table a bill to guarantee local purchasing and reserve a percentage of Canadian content in public contracts and federal procurement, similar to the Buy American Act. The Bloc has also called on the federal government to support Quebec's lumber industry against threats from Trump through loans and investments in research and development. They're calling for pandemic-style wage subsidies for workers impacted by tariffs. Finally, they're asking for more federal support for Quebec's aluminum industry through tax credits and the redistribution of revenue from counter-tariffs. The NDP party say that they're in favor of retaliatory tariffs in response to the U.S. trade tariffs on Canada. They plan on using every dollar from said retaliatory tariffs towards supporting impacted workers within auto manufacturing, steel, and aluminum industries. The NDP are also in favor of imposing 100% tariffs on all Tesla products. Topic 2. Taxes. Taxes tend to be one of the most fleshed out parts of every party's platform, so these parts might be a little bit longer. The Liberal Party say they plan to cut income taxes for the middle class and save dual-income households up to $825 a year. They plan to cut the GST for first-time home buyers on homes up to $1 million, saying that Canadians will save up to $50,000. They plan to make mortgage payments more affordable by reviewing Canada's mortgage market to offer Canadians more options while maintaining market stability. They want to fund home retrofits and lower utility bills, making it easier for low and middle income households to adopt heat pumps and energy efficiency upgrades. They plan to deliver automatic tax filing, starting with low-income households and seniors. They also want to amend the Greenhouse Gas Pollution Pricing Act to legislate the repeal of the carbon tax. This act plans to make sure that big polluters pay and to reduce emissions and drive investment in clean technology. They plan on continuing the Canada Child Benefit, which provides up to $7,787 per child under 6 and $6,570 per child aged 6 to 17. They would keep the increase in the lifetime capital gains exemption limit to $1.25 million on the sale of small business shares and farming and fishing property. And finally, they say they would introduce legislation affecting the increase in the lifetime capital gains exemption limit in due course. The Conservative Party goes into a lot of detail about taxes as well. The Conservatives plan to defer the capital gains tax for those who choose to reinvest those earnings in Canada. They plan to lower the personal income tax from 15% to 12.75%, meaning the average worker who makes $57,000 a year will save $900, and the average working class dual income family would save $1,800. They plan to axe the carbon tax in full. They also want to axe the sales tax on homes under $1.3 million and incentivize municipalities to slash development charges. They plan to offer a Canada First TFSA top-up to reward patriotic Canadians who invest in Canada. They plan on raising the tax-free income threshold for seniors up to $34,000, which they say is $10,000 more than the current limit. They want to axe the underused housing tax as well as axe the escalator tax on alcohol. They plan to make the caregiver tax refundable. They say they want to streamline and simplify the disability tax credit. They want to pass the Taxpayer Protection Act, which bans new or higher federal taxes without asking taxpayers in a referendum. Additionally, on their platform, they say that in response to politicians utilizing tax havens, the Conservatives plan on requiring all ministers to divest fully from these tax havens. They say they also plan on enforcing tax transparency for anyone running for office to disclose where they paid taxes for the last 7 years. Finally, the Conservative Party say they want to be champions of Canada's auto sector by maintaining all existing government supports and the clean incentives for the auto sector supply chain, as well as scrapping the planned $20,000 tax on gas-powered cars. The Bloc Party's platform is written entirely in French, so we've done our best to try to translate it and share the pertinent information within these podcast episodes. The Bloc Party say that they would table a bill offering tax incentives for seniors who choose to remain in the workforce. They would also call for the GST credit to be doubled in quarters when the inflation rate exceeds the Bank of Canada's target between 1 and 3% and pay it out monthly. They would push to cut the GST on all secondhand goods and require a single tax report, which Quebec would administer. They say that they would end the federal incentive drawback programs that are in place. The NDP party's commitments also go into details about taxes. The NDP pledged to raise the amount of untaxed income from $16,129 to $19,500. They would eliminate GST on essentials, for example, energy, internet, and mobile phone bills. They say that they would keep the proposed increase in the capital's gains tax, reinvesting that revenue in universal pharmacare, improving access to healthcare, national rent control, new housing, and a cap on grocery prices. They say that permanent personal income tax cuts will be targeted to low and middle income earners. And the NDP is promising to raise $94.5 billion in revenue by implementing a 1% tax on households with a net worth between $10 million and $50 million, 2% for those worth $50 million to $100 million, and 3% to those worth over $100 million. Topic 3. Jobs. The Liberal Party says that they'll make it easier for veterans to get jobs by working with provinces and territories to streamline the recognition of military trade credentials in the civilian world. They say they plan on making it easier for veterans to get jobs by working with provinces and territories to streamline the recognition of military trade credentials in the civilian world. They plan on creating a $2 billion strategic response fund to boost our auto sector's competitiveness, protect manufacturing jobs, and support workers to upskill their expertise in the industry. They say they want to get young Canadians started with their first job by connecting young people with the jobs and skill development opportunities they need to launch their professional lives. They plan on achieving this by providing funding and expanding the mandates, where appropriate, for the Student Work Placement Program, the Youth Employment and Skills Strategy, Canada Summer Jobs, and the Canadian Service Corps. Finally, they plan on unlocking new economic opportunities for women by increasing support for the Women's Economic and Leadership Opportunities Fund. The Conservative Party also have plans to bring more jobs to Canadians. They plan on using Article 6 of the Paris Agreement to bring home jobs while exporting cleaner resources like Canadian liquefied natural gas and technologies to help lower global emissions. They plan on doubling the reach of the Ready, Willing, and Able program, helping 4,000 Canadians with autism or intellectual disabilities find and keep jobs. They plan on scrapping what they call the job-killing emissions cap on oil and gas production. They also say that they plan to ease the transition from veteran life to civilian life with job training, placement support, and mentorship. The Conservative Party say that they would reinstate apprenticeship grants of up to $4,000, that they would fund training halls to develop 350,000 workers over 5 years by expanding the Union Training and Innovation Program, and that smaller unions would also have equal access to funding that covers up to 75% of the costs of building and running those programs. Additionally, the party would allow union training centers and colleges to pre-register apprentices for EI with the aim of creating a special class of rapid EI payout for skilled tradespeople. They say that they would work with provinces to harmonize health and safety regulations so tradespeople can work anywhere in Canada without having to repeat training. Finally, they say they would also allow traveling tradespeople to write off the full cost of food, transportation, and accommodation. The Bloc Party's plans for jobs includes the following. The Bloc Party would change the eligibility criteria for EI for unemployed workers whose job loss is related to the trade war. They're calling for pandemic-style wage subsidies for workers impacted by tariffs. They would require the federal government to pay off the federal employment insurance debt accumulated during the pandemic, and they say they would keep the retirement age at 65. The NDP's commitments include improving employment insurance, which they say will help more workers stay afloat during tough times and avoid being pushed into lower-paying, lower productivity jobs. They say that revenue generated by tariffs will be directed to the EI fund to avoid adding undue strain to employers and workers with higher premiums. The NDP also plans to expand Companies Creditors Arrangement Act and protections for workers to include post-employment benefits, for example, unpaid wages and severances. They say that they would raise the cap on the Wage Earner Protection Program to cover what they say are wages that people are owed. The Wage Earner Protection Program, or WEPP, is currently capped at $8,844. They pledge to strengthen and enforce directors' liability for unpaid compensation and create a mechanism for workers to be paid in whole through trust-held funds or federal guarantees. The NDP say they also want to stop what they call predatory foreign takeovers by applying net benefit to economic and employment criteria, in particular, unionized jobs to prevent foreign companies from buying Canadian assets with the intention of dismantling them and firing workers. Finally, they say that they would increase transparency about promises companies have made in their takeover bid, and it would include unions within that review. As we mentioned at the beginning of the episode, there's a lot more policies and points made within each of these parties' platforms, so we encourage you to go read them, and you can find them linked within the description of this episode. Thank you for listening to this episode, focusing on how major federal parties plan on addressing the economy if elected into power.
You're tuned in to CJSW 90.9 FM's 2025 federal election coverage. To listen back to full episodes, please visit cjsw.com or download the CJSW mobile app available for iPhone and Android.